Welcome to you all. As you've noticed, het gesprek is in het Engels. Ik hoop dat dat geen probleem is. Mochten jullie toch iets niet verstaan, stoot u een buur aan om voor wat hulp om te vertalen. En als het dan nog niet duidelijk is, dan moet je gewoon roepen. En als je inderdaad nog op hun honger zit achteraf, de bibliotheek is vandaag heel de dag open en we collected all the books there are on Camille's work, so you can really dive into this now, today, or any day, actually, if you make an appointment. So here we go. Welcome. How are you feeling?
Great.
You are good?
My voice is really broken, but...
Okay. You let us know if there's no sound anymore, and then we'll improvise from there. I've been introducing you earlier this week, to the press, to the guides of the museum, to our guests earlier, as a traveler, both physically and mentally. As you have moved from city to city, from country to country, but also as an artist you travel between so many kinds of art, as Peter already introduced. From film to drawing, to painting, installation, sculpture, text, it's all there. And then you also find inspiration in so many different kinds of knowledge systems, from literature to anthropology, mythology, religion, botanica. It goes on and on. Like, do you recognize yourself in that image of a nomad, or of this kind of explorative way of working and living?
I don't know. I feel like my long-time desire is actually stability, but I feel a bit like a cat. Like I like to actually do the same things. I'm a very routine person, but it's more like accidentally that I ended up traveling and like changing cities. Mm-hmm. But also, I mean, in order to stay a long time, sometimes you need to actually move. I'm often reminded of the life of the artists of the past centuries, that when you have an exhibition or like a project, I'd rather like move for a certain number of time and have like a little bit of stability, and then I go back home. But I feel like in a way, in order to travel a lot, you need to have like a very strong anchor.
Okay, so are you more comfortable in a routine, in a...
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
But it just never happened, so maybe it's not true. Maybe I'm just ambivalent with my own desires.
All right. Good to know. Was it something you grew up with, a lot of travel, or not so much?
Not at all, actually. As children, I was really dreaming we would travel, but my mother was really afraid of flying. Mm-hmm. So it really limited the travels to everything that is reachable by train.
Okay, yeah, okay. Maybe exactly because your way of working is so vast, you cover such a big terrain, it is all the more remarkable that for the Middelheim exposition you chose only sculptures, to work only with sculptures. Very strong focus in the medium. Can you tell us, like, what made you make that choice, and how has that experience been for you?
I mean, it's a choice we made together. I think that for me, Middelheim Museum was really a unique opportunity to think about a show that would be really focused on sculpture, and also to think about how the sculpture could relate to the environment, like the garden, and also what would be the perception of people who doesn't come to see sculpture, who doesn't come to see art. I think what's very unique and interesting in Middelheim Museum is that there's a lot of people who just come to run, or to picnic, or to walk their dogs, or their children. And this is really, like, I keep wondering what are they thinking while we were installing. I saw people stopping, and the children starting to touch the sculpture. Oh no, sorry, it's not allowed. But
almost touching the sculptures.
But I think this is really, I mean, really like a treat for an artist to be given the opportunity to present work in a context that is only outdoor, or mostly outdoor, and all, I mean, I also really like the concept of the pavilion, like the idea of like something that is a bit like a folies in a way, like a indoor that is just conceived as an extension of outdoor, like a promenade architecture.
As we are at the outdoors, and you speak very fondly of it, which I of course love. But such a green park also changes constantly. The things grow and they decay, and structures and colors and light change all the time. And we work here every day, so for us the process is very gradual, it's very, very soft. But for you, who was working from a great distance and coming back and forth with many months in between, it must have been quite a shock every time. Like, it looks so different any time. So I was wondering, because I know that the way you present your work and your sculpture is very much part of your thinking process and also of the work itself, actually. So I was wondering, like, how difficult or how uncomfortable was this process for you, like with this changing environment, to figure out, like, how am I gonna bring the works into this?
Actually, it was really exciting for me, the idea of the change of season and the change of the light. I think the change of the light was a bit more of a difficulty in the sense that with the placement of sculpture, it's difficult to take into account all the different positions of the sun, and the direction of light is so important for a sculpture. It's almost like a sculptural element in itself. The way the light arrive on the sculpture, because the light is sculpting shapes. So that, I think, was really the challenge, to think that about a placement of sculpture that is interesting at different moment of the day. But the season, I don't think for me was so much of a challenge, because I've made another project, which was a public commission of a permanent outdoor sculpture, and it was in the mountain, so there was like snow in winter, and it was completely
more
yellow.
drastic. Yeah.
In spring was covered with yellow flowers, and in summer was like first very green and then extremely dry because there's coal all around. It also had to resist the weight of a coal that would scratch on it, and not only just one coal. Apparently there was an engineer who said, you need to resist. What if all the coal
really
decided to scratch on the same spot?
They do a collective scratching, the cows?
I thought it was very unlikely, but you said there's a possibility that we cannot ignore, that they all decided to scratch on the same sculpture at the same spot. So I think after having done that commission, any other installation outdoors.
It's much more extreme than what we as a Belgian climate have to offer, I can imagine. And also very few cows, unfortunately. Until now in the museum, there's still stuff that we can improve. But I was wondering, because I know that in the last few months you also made new works. How did this come together in your mind? Like, you were working for this context. We are showing these works here for the first time, I think.
I think that one of the, initially I wanted to make a much larger sculpture for the museum, but then we were, like, the year of preparation of the show was 2020, which was not a year of great enthusiasm for large-scale production from the galleries. And so we couldn't really go that direction. But then instead, I think that was actually interesting to think. It led or reinforced the idea of thinking about the whole garden as a medieval garden, as a most like intimate, sort of domestic almost setting, where the labyrinthic maze-like bush structure reproduced sort of like normal room, or like normal, it's not the right word, but like domestic size rooms. And so this is the way I think we're able to deal with the scale. But one thing that for me that felt like necessary to add with the new work is also work that makes a connection between the nature and the idea of domestic labor and the idea of care. So for example, the work Landry, which is in the water, has a very important signification, the show, because it connects the idea of humidity, fluidity, the biological functioning of the body with the veins, the productive aspect of humidity, but the threatening aspect of it, because when the body leaks, it's always like not a really good sign. It's a sign of dysfunction for us as human. So it felt like this work was really important, connecting different topics that were not all embedded or so clearly embedded in other work. That's, I think, also working with water seemed really important, like Landry, the first fontaine, but not the last.
Exactly.
And there's so much water in Middelheim. Yeah. And with a show called Wet Job, which has sculpture dealing with humidity, like the humidifier, and many sculpture reproduce the shape of something leaking. And so it felt like necessary to have a more like direct approach to water.
All right, interesting. Yes, for people who haven't seen it, it's on Hortiflora. It's in the water pond. It's a beautiful little fountain. I will tell you no more. You'll have the description, and then you have to find it in the show. It's really something to look out for, I promise. In the museum, also in our museum, the general rule is do not touch the works. Like the collection and the artworks that are on display. That's among other things why we have the guards to say, like, please don't climb on the works, don't touch the works, because it actually harms patinas and can harm the work. But your work kind of consults or brings up the idea of tactility and touch very much, actually. It seems to be like a key element in what you do, not only because several works are like addressing the idea of connecting or overlapping bodies, but also because the patina of the works is very specific. When you walk throughout the collection of the Middelheim Museum and you see the modernist bronzes, you will see that some parts are shinier than others. Like usually it's breasts and buttocks and bellies, because especially children, they love to touch the works there, and then they become more shiny. And you also know, like, in certain cities there are like these monuments or sculptures that are supposed to bring you luck if you touch it, like the bull on Wall Street, for instance. So that gives out a very shiny effect on the patina. And the way you work patinas, combining what is glossy and what is matte, seems to also suggest that the work has been touched in certain places, and for others not at all, has not been touched at all. So can you share with us some thoughts on the connection maybe between skin and tactility and the way that you work with bronze?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I was attracted by bronze as a material is how like both close and distant it is to skin, and also the capacity for bronze to be very liquid, so to kind of like take a very subtle, detail in the surface. It also can be engraved. I also really like bronze because it's also material that can be recasted. So it never feel like the sculpture can look in motion, but actually from a material like physical point of view, they are in motion because they can be at any time melted and transformed into another shape. And then another aspect of bronze that really attracted me was when I visited the British Museum to see the bronze sculpture that have been touched always at the same part, which is always the round shape. And not only children, I mean, adults too. Like everybody is attracted to touch round shape. And it's interesting because they say it brings luck, but I think bringing luck is an excuse to justify the just primal desire for human to touch round shape. And but that very primary instinct is something that I thought was for me a very fertile ground, very interesting aspect of sculpture. And this is why it seems really natural to connect reflection on the early development of children with sculpture making and the process of like how do we understand shape, where does it start, what is our perception of language when we cannot pronounce words, like when we don't have teeth. Like all these questions seemed really relevant in the field of sculpture, and it also felt to me that it was something that was new, that I hadn't seen explored so much.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah, absolutely. You're thinking of a work like Every Goodbye, maybe? Yeah, exactly. I was also thinking very much, I said to you yesterday when we were walking through the park, like the patinas of the works almost look like maybe a reflection of light on water, or the way that light falls through the leaves of a tree, or it seems to be changing constantly also. Sometimes the works look like a shadow all on their own. And I was also thinking about, like, it's so meticulously done, and I know that even if there's several editions of one work, you change the patinas for every work. It almost looks like drawing or painting for the outdoors almost. Can you tell me something of how you decide to apply a patina or to work it?
Yeah, I mean, originally when I started to work with bronze, I liked the greenish, like natural, sort of like we call it like antique. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's a institutionalized word.
It's fine, it's clear. I think everybody knows what you mean.
Because it felt a little bit like it has a sort of like snake, like the capacity to evoke like both mineral but also like reptile skin or something. And then as I was working the bronze, I discovered all the capacity of bronze to also be warm and to have like layers of like yellow and red, and the possibility for bronze also to have gradients, to can transform one color to the other. L'Enfant Plus, one of the work in the exhibition, really has like a gradients from like from red to green. And then as I was recently making more and more patina, I discovered the capacity of like the copper when it's just fire. All the color of the fire, like the physical color of the fire, are reflected on the copper. Like you have yellow, pink, blue, and green, and they also appear in gradients, which is really interesting. But this effect is almost impossible to stabilize. So that was a little bit the challenge. But one of the work, like End of Me, mm-hmm. and also. And from a lower, I mean, you don't see it so well, but the one that looks like a little like animal, like comforting toy, mm-hmm. In this sort of like doll bed.
The horizontal sculpture.
Yeah, this one also has. I mean, I don't know if you can feel. It's very warm, the color of the metal, and it has a lot of variation, almost like you've been pouring oil on it. And so these are all this sort of experimental effects that we developed recently, mm-hmm. with together with my fabricator Charles Milhomme, who is also a painter. So he always also was really very much like a partner into exploring a way to treat patina that is not just a surface, but mm-hmm. that is really like for me the patina is like 50% of the sculpture. It's very important. Mm-hmm. We also work often after the cast with like engraving and incision, so that we can do a first layer that is really dark or really light, and then a second layer, and the first layer are appearing as in the like engraving. Mm-hmm. It's the same system in the deepest stroke. And I mean, this is really a fascinating aspect of sculpture, which really, I think, maybe comes from my experience of doing engraving. My mom was an engraver, sure. Yeah. So I've been used to work with metal, but the bronze allow so many different and now like just like the very recent work that you can see in the exhibition, Mon Corps de Femme, and mm-hmm. Two on Call. yeah, if you go, you will see that they have also a very multicolor, sort of iridescent patina, which is made with, we call it the makeup for sculpture, which is like wax and pigment. That's also like it's also even more difficult to control and to reproduce and to maintain. But it's also, I mean, flowers in the garden are also difficult to control and to maintain.
Absolutely. I was just thinking when you were talking about gradients, and you speak about Mon Corps de Femme, the gradient that is there between red and green is reflected in the hedge that is behind it, which is also a gradient between red and green. It's a beech hedge, and it's beautiful, but it's not stable. It will change on a daily basis almost. Which is exciting for me to hear that you don't consider bronze as a stable, fixed thing, but as something that is moving. Actually, that is in motion, as you said. Very interesting, because I think most people, and particularly those who are familiar with the Middelheim collection, and especially the modernist pieces that have been on the same spot often for 75 years, and for instance, monuments in public space. They are supposed to be there all the time, so they become kind of invisible because they become like part of the furniture of the surroundings, maybe a little bit. So it's very interesting for me to hear that for you, bronze is something that is very active, very much something changing and in flux. Interesting, and also because, and that maybe kind of ties back to the idea of tactility, of touch. There's also, or there's equally many works, I think, in the show that seem to be trying to avoid connection or touch, that are kind of retreating or moving away, like in L'Enfant Plus that you mentioned, or in OCPD, something like the sculptures almost want to escape themselves. Can you recognize something in that?
Yeah, I would say OCPD especially, and some sculpture are escaping and some sculpture are a bit attacking, like some are a bit aggressive. I think OCPD is a sculpture that I describe sometimes in the family of this sculpture, because there's a little bit of a family, seeing them all together. Some of them, they came very easily, and from the sketch to the materialization, they are very close to the initial idea. And other sculpture, they initiated with the sketch as usual, but then as I make them, there's a struggle, and I don't find an easy solution. And sometimes the sculpture stay half finished in the studio for like 4 years or 3 years, sometimes 5 years. And OCPD is one of them that I designed the initial shape, and it was laying on a base that was rectangular, and I couldn't understand what was wrong with this sculpture, and that there was, because I wanted it to be really floating. And I thought it has to be like a bubble speech, or a flag, or maybe an écuyère, you know, the women who are doing acrobatic dance on the back of a horse.
A floating bronze.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted it to
a weightless
float.
Bronze.
I mean, this is the goal. I feel like many of us sculptors are trying to have sculpture levitate. And I think my fabricator spent his time, like basically every day we work together, he's like, you know that it cannot like levitate. I cannot make it levitate.
Very nice.
But we try.
Yeah.
and OCPD was really, the idea was that neither the shape, neither the base is really a fixed point, and both of them had to look in flux, as if they were moved by the wind.
Very nice, I think. For me, it also kind of opens up the possibility of talking about like what is desirable and what is not desirable. Like we have, I think it is easy to say like we like closeness, we like togetherness, we like connection, and we dislike distance, we dislike being alone, we dislike being separate. But looking at those works, I think maybe it's more nuanced than that, because being close also kind of, demands that you give up a piece of yourself, maybe, or that you make yourself available for another element, which is not always comfortable necessarily.
Yeah, it's also not always pleasant to be touched.
No.
And some of the sculpture has this like very pointy. One of the overlapping figure is extremely pointy, to a point that actually I have often security guards making comments that maybe the sculpture is dangerous, that we need to put a distance. But I'm often explaining that, I mean, it's not like all pointy objects are dangerous, and it's not like everything that's soft
is safe. No,
is safe. And if somebody really wants to smash his head on a sculpture, he can also do it on a flat surface.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Talking about the overlapping figures, some works, and especially I think the ones that are in the pavilion at house on the right side, they also look a bit like you could pick them up for functional reasons, like to almost practically use them, like maybe as a tool or as even a body prosthesis or something, like they have a function. Works like self-organizing, maybe even parts of 3-2-1 or La Pose. And these works seem to put in perspective your sculptures as form of fine arts. I don't know if you mind me saying so, but it makes you look at the work like it's something approachable, very much. Like there's a generosity there, I think. Like you suggest that the sculptures are to be put to use by the spectator as they see fit. I want to add mentally, please, not physically, try to use them today. You'll make my life very difficult if you do. It seems to me, for me, to be about a refusal to accept any hierarchy in the interpretation of your work. Is that something that you recognize, or that you can, or?
I think yes, but more than hierarchy, I think it's a state of like finished, like or finitude. I don't know how to say, a state of like being in a permanent state that I'm trying to avoid. I think the tools, like the gloves or the hammer, says something about the magic of the work as it lay in the studio, as it appeared, that I've been always trying to protect, and it's very difficult to protect because everyone around wants the sculpture to be stable, to be secured so that nobody can steal it. We were talking about the color earlier, and one idea that popped my mind is also that talking about stable color, like the antique patine that we know and we see everywhere, which is natural oxidation of bronze. And we're talking about color that are very unnatural for bronze, like the iridescent pink, and color that are natural for bronze, but that are very ephemeral, like the color, the rainbow color of the fire and the heat on it. But it just made me think that if you think about nature, in nature, all the most beautiful color are color that are very fragile, that's very ephemeral. The color of the fish, for example, are only able to be visible in the water. The minute you take the fish out of the water, he loses all the color. The color of birds, the color of butterfly, the color of flowers. All these colors are very ephemeral by nature, and they are almost impossible to produce, which is also true in terms of like pigment. Like the pigment in watercolor are the most beautiful, powerful pigment because they have no, liant. They have very little glue, very little like chemical products. It's basically just pigment and water. But that property makes it much more volatile and much more difficult to stabilize, both from light and from water. And in general, I think that in my work, I'm always trying to see, it's a little bit of an impossible project, but to protect the ephemeral beauty of things as they appear at the moment of the making, and in a way keeping the tools around and maybe keeping some of the aspect of the process making as if you could at any moment pick them up and change it is maybe a sort of way to conjure the curse of having to do an object that you cannot work on at some point. It just escapes your hands and it just exists.
Yeah, you keep the possibilities open. Very nice. I love this idea of openness and things not being final, but being just momentaneous and waiting for the next thing to happen. It's not usually how we work in Western society, I think. We have a tendency to box things up in clear categories so we can talk about it and then fit everybody into one of these boxes, like positions of power or norms about what is valuable and what is not valuable, which kind of identities are acceptable and which are not, what we are supposed to see as positive and negative. And if I understood anything of your work, I think it is very much for me about challenging these norms, these boxes. You now talk about it in terms of this ephemeral beauty, but do you also see something like in this more maybe philosophical or political openness?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in other aspect of my work, the categories is a big topic, especially I think in films, but also in installation and painting. And I think I'm both fascinated and repulsed by order and by system of organization. Mm-hmm. It's both attractive and a burden. And as I came to work more and more with it, it becomes more apparent that I was interested in the relationship, not just the system, but the relationship the system maintained with the exception, and how the exception is vital for the system to function, and what kind of circulation exists between the two. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I mean, I would say that my natural tendency would be to identify with exception. I think maybe as a woman, you are still always a bit considered weirdly, even though being a majority demographically on his earth, still considered a minority in terms of representation and culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very much true. I was thinking about my next question already, and how to connect. When you say this about the female position, I think also the female position has been very much associated with maybe intuition and play or experiment, whereas the opposite side then stands for reason and research and objectivity and fact. And I know that in your work there's a balance of both somehow. Very much. Your practice is very much research-based. You're a ferocious reader, very knowledgeable about a very wide range of subjects. So I wonder, how does that work in your head? Like, how do you connect, or how do you connect this factual knowledge with room for experiment, room for play, room for openness?
I mean, I don't see knowledge and intuition as two opposed category. Okay. I think that intuition is a motor of knowledge, and knowledge is necessary for intuition. It's a little bit the same relationship, I would say, between training and like in terms like, I would say that you need to kind of, the same knowledge is a bit the same way as a gym, like it's something that you do to keep your muscle alert, and but then the moment of the fight or the moment of action, it's intuition that is triggered and is dominating. And I think that in many aspects I see art practice similar as sport, where reading is some kind of like training just to keep the spirit in good motion. And also a sort of like quick scan of a lot of different ideas. But then the moment to actually really make a decision and construct the work is mostly an informed intuition that is driving decisions.
Very nice. I've thought about that. I have to process it a little bit. But then I was wondering, like, how then do you decide what comes out? You talk about the moment of the fight. Like, is there then an order in which do you start with drawing and then it develops from there, or does a certain fight require a different tool or weapon? Like, how does that work? How do you choose?
For sculpture, most of the time it starts with keywords. I do a list of titles in advance because I'm not always able to work anywhere, and often the idea of something comes at a moment where you don't really cannot like draw or text notes very well. So I write on my phone keywords that make me remember what I was trying to explore, or something that I have to revisit later. And then those keywords also together become some kind of poem, even though it's a bit absurd because they sometimes have apparently nothing to do with each other. But I mean, nothing to do also often mean a lot to do, you know, as a brain has the capacity to draw connection and continuity with very disparate elements, which is in practice something that I use a lot in my work and in the way I work. So this is a little bit the start, and then the sketch is very much the beginning for sculpture. But I think for when I work on films, I write mostly.
Okay, nice. All right. I was also thinking there are very different speeds. Writing or drawing, I can imagine, is a very different speed than or pace for your thinking than a sculpture. Making a sculpture is a group effort. You have to explain stuff. You have to, like, there's a.
Actually, I don't feel like. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I have like fabricators that really are like.
They can finish your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean It's funny because sometimes we talk like when somebody outside of our like binôme witness or conversation, they often think we are completely crazy because we have like created a sort of language to talk about shape that because we've been working for almost like 15 years, and then we say, oh, like you have to shock this a little bit. Like shocking means like to make it very like pointy and smooth, and then this is like a peach, and this area is an apple, and this is like this look like it's too young, and you need to like age it. So then we work with a metallic brush to create wrinkles, or there's a whole kind of vocabulary of how to work with shapes. But also often we don't even need words because it's very visual. I draw, and then if I need to change the model and we're not in the same room, we have a system where he sends me pictures and then I draw on top of the picture. Now with WhatsApp, it's extremely immediate and easy. And then I'm able to kind of like, it's very much like a teacher in class. Like I put in red the things that I don't like, and I put in green the things that I would like, the way I would like them to be.
Nice. I love this this connection with text and the digital, the drawing and the work in space, in three-dimensional space. I think also something very remarkable of how you work with sculptures is that you work in series. So one sculpture doesn't have to say it all. They have each other, very much like chapters of a book maybe, or a series of drawings around a subject. So how do you go from one sculpture to the next one in a series? Because you can work on different series.
But I work on all of them at the same time.
Exactly, like it's not one series and then you go to the next one. They have parallel lives.
No, the series, I work the series one after the other most often, but they overlap sometimes a little bit. I mean, there's always a moment of overlap. because it's never easy. I mean, for me, they never come naturally to end something. I never know how to end. I mean, this is what I was saying before also, that I'm always trying to escape the moment where things are finished. And the same way with the series, it never like came to my consciousness. I'm never like aware of the moment where it ends, but there's never actually an end. There's only beginning. So the beginning of something new marks the end of something else, but I also often have reluctance to even say that, because some sculpture are really belonging to two families. They are at the beginning of one and the end of one, and then it's often my studio manager, who is a trained archivist. It's really her training, and she often like, oh, is this like this family or is that other family? And sometimes it takes me like weeks to decide. And I change my mind all the time. Like, why is this culture in the series system attachment? It should not be there. It should be in wet job. I was like, but you told me it was system. And I was like, no, actually, I think it was already. Like,
okay,
so
very interesting. Because I thought there was, something really keeping them together, or maybe there was an order in which they came about that has a logic in the series itself. But it's more like a grouping of.
I mean, they generally, when I start working on one sculpture, there's always like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a 10 sketch that comes around, and then I select the one that I think will be the more interesting. But then it's something that I actually don't talk about often. But there's also a lot of sculpture that never, like the model is being made, but they are never casted. Like they just like wait, because I still don't know if they are worth doing. And then sometimes after a few years we destroy them, and sometimes we recuperate some element. But it's not always a very like straightforward decision. What comes next? Like it's not very. I work on everything all at once. And then sometimes, some days I feel more attracted to one's work, and then another day another work. And in a way, the fabricator I work with is very similar, is also very intuitive. And sometimes there's work that we've promised to an exhibition or to the gallery, and he keeps not working on them because he's more interested in working in another one. And I'm often on the same cycle as him, so it's very complicated because we keep like neglecting a work that has a strict deadline, while another work that doesn't have a strict deadline is getting all the attention.
Exactly. I get that can be a challenge for your surroundings and with the teams you work with, but I can absolutely identify with the idea of something to develop and to get into that. Absolutely. But this idea that you talk about of the escape of the moment of something being finished is also something I think that's very much in the show. This idea of non-fulfillment or something not going maybe as you expected, works like no message or undelivered message, dropping the ball, learning to lose, too early. Like there's a lot of titles that seem to suggest like maybe something went not quite as planned.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that you seem to be making room for this imperfection somehow. But you do it with such beauty and kindness that to me it feels like you say it's okay if something is maybe not happening as planned.
Yeah, I mean it's a learning, it's a process to accept. But as I feel like, especially working with, especially sculpture, I would say that sculpture need to a spirit that accepts unpredictability and welcome failure, because it's really working with the material world. It's, I think, like in a conceptual artwork production process, like Solid, like there's really a plan, and the plan is executed, and it needs to be perfectly executed to be really the plan, for the plan to really shine. But I feel like when you really work with materials like heavy, like that have weight, that are sensitive to time, that react to temperature. That also, I mean, recently we found out with COVID that just also making a sculpture show is extremely tied up to the whole world situation, because all of a sudden if China is closed, and China is one of the biggest producer of metals, and South America, and then the price of copper rise, and then the shipping costs also are connected with, and then painting can be shipped by FedEx, but it's like a 1 ton sculpture cannot be shipped by FedEx. It has to be shipped by an arts shipper that has to make a box that has to be made in wood, and all this chain of materials, like really fabrication, is very heavy in the process of art making for sculpture, which I think, with the experience of doing that, makes you very zen towards like what can happen. And in a way, I think it fits also well the practice of like working on several projects at the same time, and just like seeing what is ready first, a little bit, like in a way trying to resist the sort of system where you have to deliver, because I feel like it's always difficult, and it's something that really important for artists to feel like you can always escape any minute. You can take a different road. If you don't keep that spirit, a lot of work end up being extremely boring and extremely with mistakes, because I mean, materials and shape, they have also their own existence, so you need as an artist to be able to adapt to them. And if you constantly try to imprint your will with too much stubbornness and authority, then you miss the opportunity to play with accident, or to come back on a decision that maybe was not. Also to have the humility to recognize that sometimes you're wrong. And in sculpture, like a mistake is a big mistake. Like it costs a lot of money, it's heavy, and then it's on everyone's face. We were talking about like nightmare of impotence in the show as we were visiting the Middelheim Pavilion, and we were talking about the dream of losing teeth, and how it's connected to a loss of power. And I was telling you that, and you were telling me that you have this nightmare. I don't know if I can tell it here.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I'm haunted in my dreams. Go ahead.
You want to tell your dream?
Go ahead.
That you told me that you have this nightmare that your the previous director sits in your office when you arrive in the morning, and he's telling you, "What are you doing here?"
What's all this stuff doing here in my office? I need this chair.
And have this nightmare that I arrive to an exhibition, and that somebody is like, "Oh, look, your sculpture is beautiful," and then it's an horrible, like horrendous thing, and I'm like, "I didn't do that," and I like, I actually maybe I did, but I think I told you to put it in like the cabinet, or like to hide it, or like, can we put like behind this corner?
And then you have to stand there and defend it, or argument, or explain to people what it means.
Exactly, and then I have to explain in front of a crowd how the sculpture, I decided to do it, and then I feel like actually I did not. Like this is not mine. I have no idea why it looked like that.
I feel this point of vulnerability might be the ideal moment to maybe open up to the room for questions. Maybe you have some questions for us, for Camille, about maybe those who have seen the show or not yet. Maybe we go just for a moment still to the title of Wet Job, which I think beautifully wraps a ribbon around everything that we've been talking about, like the idea that wet, literally wet, things of fluidity and things that are streaming. But wet job, I think, also has a very double meaning, right?
Yes, wet job also means. I mean, it means also a crime. It means like a crime on how do you say when you commission somebody to commit a crime?
Hit murder.
Yeah, hit murder. And it seems fitting. I mean, wet job is also kind of like the activity of breastfeeding, and it's also, I think, interestingly making the connection between the labor and the nature of labor being sort of dirty, and any labor actually being dirty, being also something that generates sweat, that generate like effort, legs, and in a way the labor of taking care of children, of raising children, and the labor of making artwork is, I think, are both like especially dirty and messy. And
Yes.
and so the title was a way to connect those two ideas. And the crime connotation I liked very much, because it reminded me of something Louise Bourgeois said about a sculpture, that it was always, accomplishing some kind of murder. She said, in my life, I'm a victim, but in my art, I'm the murderer.
Okay. There's potency there. Agency, absolutely. We've given you a few moments. Has anybody come up with a question? No? I think they'll have to go and see the show and then find you in the course of the day. That might be a thing. What do you think?
Yeah.
Should we do that?
Yeah.
There's somebody. Yes, please. You have to use your voice, because
I didn't see yet the sculptures, but the pattern of touched light, did you put it at purpose, where you thought your sculpture will be touched, or was it at random that you put a touched light pattern?
It depends. Sometimes I add it as a way to kind of increase a reflection. It's really a way to kind of like direct the light. I was saying earlier that light is really a sculpting element, and one aspect I think is to control the light a little bit, is to bring back the shininess of the metal. But it's also it's interesting, because I've never phrased it, but it's a little bit of a double, like it's a little bit of a dangerous thing. It's a little bit like Dorian Gray, or sort of like, you bring more beauty and more shininess, but also it's much more fragile if you do that. So it's like there's a price to pay to light a little bit with this activity. But yeah, I think I try to take inspiration from what I would imagine people would like to touch, but not only. I also use it as a tool to sometimes some detail also are not visible with the patina, so scratching the surface and bringing back the light of the metal, make it more obvious to understand the surface.
I was just thinking that some works also look like they've touched themselves. Like Shemale, for instance, like the thigh is really shiny, so it looks like he's been like standing up or something, getting active. That's also part of it. Does that answer your question? Yes, it does. All right, there's another one here in front.
I would like to go back to the idea of wet job as a crime, as a commission crime. So you say Louise Bourgeois said the same thing. Making art is like committing a crime. So my question is, who do you want to see killed or murdered? Your darlings or your obsessions or your? That's a very personal question. Don't have to ask.
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I feel like probably it's part of myself that I want to kill, but also family member, for sure. Like probably my father in the first place. But also my mother, I would imagine. I think a lot of a lot of the sculpture making also make it very apparent, the like sensuality also of like the touch being like slightly threatening, like how quickly from touching you get to like hurting as well. And I think it's something also with working with clay, but then also working with other material. The other material I work with for the model is foam, and I mostly work with a knife. And it's true that there is a real satisfaction to work with a knife and to kind of cut and like stab, and to a point that actually they are not in this exhibition, but the most recent group of work that I did is called Je Coupe, and they all have a knife in the sculpture itself, because as I was actually not able to sculpt for a while when I had my first child, I was looking at the knife to cut fruit, which was a very nice shape knife, like gueule, it has this very nice curve. And I was like, what a perfect object, like the beauty of this. But the beauty of this is also coming from the capacity of this to be a weapon, I think.
It's like standing on a very high cliff. Like the beauty is part of the danger of having a terrible fall.
Yeah. Danger is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I was also, when you mentioned Louise Bourgeois just now, thinking about your monument for nannies, because Louise, of course, she had a very complicated relationship with her family and with the nanny of the family who had an affair with her father. But you made a monument for nannies that's in the show. It's like, kind of felt to me like a restorative gesture towards...
Yes, I that was something that, I felt like the nannies in my life as a child, like I still like hunting I still remember them. And I still remember the feeling of security and the feeling of like somebody who's really dedicated to you that it brings. And still now when I hire a nanny for my children, I still want to seduce a nanny. I still want to be loved by her, I noticed. And I was like, why am I trying to, like what do I need to prove to the nanny that I'm worth love as well? And I realized that's because I still have a sort of like childish love for the nanny, and a longing for her, that the nanny also go away at some point. And it's often also a relationship that is a little bit unvalorized, I think, in society. Is something that the nanny is like obliterate of the picture very often. Actually, when taking a picture of the child, she's being like cut out. And also, but she exists in the child memory. And then trying to dig to find the information about the nanny is actually sometimes difficult, because even the parents sometimes don't remember what was her name and how long she stayed. But it was, sometimes they were taking care of children for like years. And most of the time, actually, they did spend more time with the children than their own parents. But all of a sudden, from one day to the other, they disappear without any explanation, and this relationship is being treated as it has no emotion connected to it, while it's totally a lie. And I think that behind that desire to hide the nanny, there is a lot. There is also, obviously, a lot of racial history, because 90% of the nanny are women of color, and also in like slavery, a lot of women were nannies and breastfeeding children, to the damage of their own children. And this comes very quickly, and then also comes very quickly the social injustice between class, but also how in the patriarchal system the role of women is so devalorized that this chain of injustice is like a cascade falling from a woman to the other, and they are unable to recognize each other's value. And this is a result of the way society is designed to devalorize what's is traditionally the work of women.
Absolutely. There's more questions, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the great talk. I enjoyed, especially also how you relate to the aspect of the Middelheim Museum as a public park. And also, I'm very interested to know, how did you look at the collection? Because you didn't have an empty exhibition space, but there's a collection already there. And sometimes it was bothering or not bothering, so I'm really interested to know how it is for you to see your work in a park where there's also Rodin and other stuff, so the present day sculpture.
Yeah, it's true. It was actually a really big challenge. I mean, initially, I thought I could move all the sculpture.
Sure.
And so I started to imagine how they could, and be part of the trajectory. But while looking at the collection, there were actually some sculptures I really liked. I don't remember the title, but there is this family, like a man and a woman and a dog.
By José Vermeers.
And that sculpture I really liked, and I thought it was kind of like important. It's on the way, and I was hoping that people notice the connection between the exhibition and that sculpture, specifically. In the collection of Middelheim, I really liked also the Germaine Richier insects, which in a way I think has connection with Mon Corps de Femme, the last sculpture of the exhibition, and also maybe To One Call. And also actually Too Early, which also looked like a beetle lying flat. And so there was, in a way, I was not in the end really able to curate the sculptures that were around the exhibition, but I drew support from them, the one that I thought was inspiration.
Thank you. You also had a question?
Yeah, I'm more of a reader actually, and I remember an author saying once that when he delivers a book, it becomes a book of the readers, and everyone reads something different. I'm wondering if you recognize that in watching sculptures, because I know when I'm walking around and running around in Middelheim Park, I always look at a sculpture and wonder, what does that mean? And I give it my own interpretation, and I tend not to read what's written down because I like having my own interpretation. I'm wondering how you feel when you recognize this, how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think it's really the interesting thing about art, if there's any, is really that it can be read in many different ways, and it's something I always try to do. That it's like a fan, that it has to be as open as possible, and sculpture in the public part is really like it has this capacity to be completely like. Also, I mean, no. Again, I know that people shouldn't touch the sculpture, but it's. I have to say that it's for me actually really interesting to see how people touch the sculpture, and it's like also the way children climbs it, or what they project. Because obviously for children, a sculpture immediately becomes a toy, like it immediately becomes like something to play with. But actually, again, it's not just for children. Like if we all dig a little bit towards our attraction to sculpture, we found that it's the connection to a sculpture has a lot to do with the very first object of attraction as a child, that the object we want to touch, the object we feel protected by, or the object we identify with, the object we want to hurt as well. We were talking about murder and how sculpture actually enable a sort of like vindicative person, but it's also, of course, a very primary and very famous drive of the child to destroy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Okay, Camille, this morning you have given us the color of fire, the price there is to pay for light, the beauty of danger, the value of labor, and objects of attraction. I think it is a poem in itself. I want to thank you tremendously for taking the morning to be here with us and to talk about your work so generously. We'll be here for most part of the day, I think. I know I'm supposed to thank you, or I will thank you actually gladly again at 2:30, I think, in the central square of the museum. The library is open. Please step in there if you want to discover more about her work. The museum will close at 8 tonight, so you will have plenty of time to discover every work and to discuss it amongst yourselves or with us, with the museum team who's there on site. Food and drinks are available until 9, and then at 10 I kick you all out and I close the gate. I thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.